Okay. Good morning, all. Am I audible? Okay. My voice is audible. Somebody can respond. Hello. My voice is audible. My voice is audible. Shraddha, my voice is audible. Hello. Shraddha, my voice is audible. Samarth, my voice is audible. Yes. Milind. Milind, my voice is audible. Milind. Sachin. Sachin Shirsagar. Hello, my voice is audible.
Recording in progress.
Okay, my voice is audible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, audible.
Thank you. Okay, so should I start? Should I start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now we are going to start the next unit, unit number 3, which is again major unit when we are going to consider something about the automobile. So transmission system. So on the first slide itself, one image is displayed which depicts various components used in the transmission system. So you know, for an automobile, there is engine which is acting as a prime mover, and that prime mover is going to generate some power, and that power that is required to transmit to the wheels so that automobile is able to self-propel. So whatever elements which are required to transmit this power from the engine to the wheels at the rear, that system is known as transmission system. So this is the syllabus with respect to this unit, and this chapter is having around 20 marks weightage. So it is big chapter in the syllabus, and that too important. So first one, that is a requirement of the transmission system. Here we are going to study what are the requirements of the transmission system, which components are used, and why these components are provided on the automobile. Then afterwards, we are going to see each element, such as automobile clutch, then what is requirement of the clutch. So transmission requirement is to have the clutch, but that clutch component is having particular requirements, and that we are going to see. Then we'll see the types of automobile clutch and their functions, such as types are single plate, multi-plate, centrifugal clutch, electromagnetic clutch, and the fluid flywheel. So we are going to see in detail. Then types of automotive gears. In that, we will see what is sliding mesh gearbox, what is constant mesh gearbox, and what is synchro mesh gearbox. So with respect to each, we are going to see the construction and its working, and based on the advantages and disadvantages, which type of gearbox is used in the automobile, that we are going to discuss. Then one of the important element which is used in automatic transmission, that is called as a overdrive. Then we are going to see how automatic transmission is going to work. Then torque converter, so one fluid coupling along with mechanism to increase the torque, that again we are going to call it as a torque multiplication, that we are going to see in this. Then what is epicyclic gear train? So already in the term theory of machine, we have seen epicyclic gear train. Now in the automobile, we are going to check its application, where it is used. Then propeller shaft. So already this is the general or one image. Here you can see this drive shaft is nothing but the propeller shaft. So again, there are various elements like this universal and slip joint. Then the final drive. So this is called as the final drive. Inside that there is a differential. Then construction and types of rear axle. So floating, semi-floating, fully floating, such types of rear axle, that which are based on how load is transferred to the ground via different elements, and whether axle has to rotate or it has to take the load as well. Based on that, there are different types of rear axle. And finally, introduction to wheels and the tires that we are going to see in this unit. Okay, am I audible, Sachin? Sachin Shirsagar, am I audible? Sachin, am I audible? Milind, am I audible?
Yes, sir, audible.
Okay. Now let us see one by one bits in this chapter. So first one is requirement of transmission system. So power is developed in the engine, and that power we are going to transmit to the wheels via various elements. So what are the requirements, and to fulfill that requirement, which components are required to be provided in the automobile? So requirement means it is a need to perform a particular task. So there are different needs. So first need is to have connection and disconnection of engine with rest of powertrain. So this is the engine, and from this one is the clutch, transmission, U joint, universal joints, drive shaft, and the wheel. So power is developed in engine, and it has to transmitted to the drive shaft via clutch and the transmission system, and we need to vary the torque. So every now and then we cannot have the facility to stop the engine. So engine is all time engine is running. So प्रत्येक वेळेस इंजिन बंद करायचं आणि गाडी थांबवायची, किंवा इंजिन बंद करायचं आणि गिअर बदलायचा. So that is not feasible, that is not practical. So how to compensate this requirement? So that we need to have means of connection and disconnection of engine with rest of powertrain. So how to compensate this means of connection and disconnection? So for that we are going to use the clutch. We are going to use the clutch. So I will show that. Okay. So this is first requirement. What we are going to have? Means of connection and disconnection of engine with rest of powertrain. So first requirement is fulfilled with the help of and clutch. So this is the clutch. So this we are going to see once we will finish the first slide. Okay. Then second requirement, that power, whatever power generated inside the engine, that has to be transmitted to the gearbox, and in the gearbox based on the requirement of the torque, whether vehicle is running on the plain road, whether vehicle is running in hilly terrain. So based on that, the vehicle has to, or that gearbox has to provide a varied leverage. So torque needs to be changed. So varied leverage between engine and the drive. So engine is running at 5,000 RPM. So once we need to reduce its RPM, then we'll get the maximum torque. Why that maximum torque is required? To provide the varied leverage. So that torque changes based on the requirements. So how to fulfill this requirement? For that, we need to have the transmission or the gearbox. Okay. So such types of gearbox, it may be sliding, it may be constant, that is required to provide the varied leverage. Then next one, means to transfer, to provide means to transfer power in opposite direction. Power in opposite direction. So power is generated inside the engine, and this is the flow. In this way, power is flowing and ultimately wheels are running. Now, in case of all-wheel drive, so you can see this is the transfer case. Here it is written four-wheel drive, or we can call it as all-wheel drive. So forget about part-time and the full-time. This is front differential. So here you can imagine engine power is flowing in this direction and to this rear differential. And now we need to provide power in opposite direction, and that is for this front differential. How to provide that? By using such transfer case. Then next requirement is to provide means of speed reduction between engine and the drive. Engine and the drive. So this is engine, this is clutch, this one is transmission system. So suppose engine is running at 5,000 RPM. Then that speed is given to this transmission system, and transmission system output shaft is rotating with, for example, 500 RPM, and that 500 RPM needs to be reduced. How to reduce that speed? By providing final drive. So at the end of propeller shaft, pinion is provided, and that pinion is in mesh with the crown wheel. So pinion is having less number of teeth as compared to the crown wheel, and by that combination we can get means of speed reduction between engine and the drive. Then means of to provide means of diversion of power flow at right angles. So for that, final drive is required, and inside that flywheel final drive, bevel gears are used to transmit power at 90 degree, that is at right angles, and to provide means to drive the driving wheels at different speed when required, and for that this differential is provided. Now let us see one by one. Okay, this is the transmission system of the vehicle. Okay, so million screen is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let us see one by one. So why those elements are required and whether they are going to fulfill the requirement of the transmission system. So in the transmission system, we need to have facility to connect engine with the transmission system and to disconnect the engine power with the transmission system. So for that, we need to have the clutch. So you should see, this is a schematic of the clutch assembly. This is one is engine, This is the flywheel. This one is the flywheel. This blue box, it is nothing but the gearbox. And this one is the engine, and this is the flywheel. So when engine is running, flywheel is going to rotate. And this is the clutch driven plate. Clutch driven plate. So when this plate is in contact with this flywheel, then power is transmitted to this gearbox. And when this plate is released from the contact, then power is not going to be transmitted to the gearbox. So clutch pressure plate. So this blue one, this one is the pressurized springs which are used to apply the pressure on the clutch, that is driven plate. And this one is the clutch fork. So this bearing, here one bearing is there, which is shown by the red color, and that is called as a releaser bearing. So disengaged, so this is disengaged position for the clutch, and once it will engage, then power is transmitted from engine to the gearbox. So once clutch pedal is pressed, clutch is disengaged. Now here clutch pedal is pressed and this plate is not in contact with this flywheel, so that is disengaged. But you should remember that clutch is always in engaged position. We need to provide the disengagement. So that's why while shifting the gears, disengagement of the clutch is required. Why disengagement of the clutch is required? That will disconnect engine with rest of powertrain. So while engine is running, if it is connected to the gearbox, we can't shift the gears. So this is the first element of the transmission system, and which is required to provide means of connection and disconnection of engine with rest of powertrain. So basically, some of the simple questions will be asked on this bit. So clutch is located in between engine and this gearbox. So you should remember this, such simple questions, gearbox, or we can call it as a transmission box. So you should remember this. Such simple questions may be asked during campus interview. Okay. Then next one is to provide next requirement or element which is required. It provides a varied leverage between engine and drive wheels, or means to transmit power in opposite direction. So you can see this is the gearbox. Here you can see the clutch shaft. So this is flywheel. This is clutch plate. I will show some hatching. And this is the clutch shaft. And you can consider this is the clutch shaft. Sure. So with respect to this, so this is required to have varied leverage between engine and the drive axle. So this clutch shaft is the output shaft of the clutch assembly. This gear which is mounted on the clutch shaft, which is in mesh with the counter shaft or the lay shaft, and this part is nothing but the gearbox. So this clutch shaft is connected via this gear number 1 with this counter shaft with the help of gear number 2. When this clutch shaft rotates, this lay shaft is going to rotate, and the gear on lay shaft is in mesh with the gear on the main shaft, and this one is the main shaft. So power is transmitted now to the main shaft. So this one is the simplified diagram. This is the simplified diagram. So when clutch is in engaged position, power is flowing in this way. Now you can see the various gears. So this will have a particular torque. So small gear on this lay shaft is in mesh with big gear on the main shaft. What it indicates? This is the gear combination having maximum torque with respect to this gearbox. Now if this gear is in mesh with this, so you can see the gears are having equal size. So whatever torque this shaft is getting, and that is given to this main shaft, and gears are shifted or gears are engaged just by sliding these gears either this side or this side, and that's why it is called as a sliding mesh. So this one is the sliding mesh, one example with which we can see how varied leverage between engine and the drive wheels is provided. Then second requirement, so you know, suppose this is the vehicle and this vehicle is moving in this direction, and now we need to have a reverse motion of the vehicle. So for that, what we require? One more gear, and which is provided here, and that gear is called as a idler gear. Okay, now you can see this is the clutch shaft. See this simplified figure only. This is rotating in clockwise direction. This is rotating in anti-clockwise direction. This gear is in mesh with this. Am I audible? So when this will rotate in anti-clockwise, this will rotate in clockwise. So whatever clutch shaft direction, the same with the same direction, this main shaft is going to be rotate. Now that needs to be rotate in opposite direction. How to get that? So for that, if this is rotating in clockwise, this will rotate in anti-clockwise. So if we are going to provide this idler gear in between gear on main shaft and gear on the lay shaft, will get direction of this main shaft in opposite to this clutch shaft. So clutch shaft इथं कसा rotate होतोय? Clockwise. Main shaft कसा rotate होईल? Anti-clockwise. कशामुळे? Because we have added one more gear that is called as the idler gear. So that gear number is gear number 8. So transmission system in which the idler gear is used to provide means to transmit power in opposite direction. Because of this arrangement, we can get the reverse motion of the vehicle. Okay. Then next one is next requirement, that is which provides a varied angle and power transmission at varied length. Give me 1 minute. Okay. So means of transmission at varied angle and varied length. Okay. Screen is visible, Milin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So provides means of power transmission at varied angle and varied length. So you can see this line diagram or simplified diagram first. This one is the gearbox. Here there is clutch assembly, and here somewhere engine is there. So the difference in height of the engine and the wheel. So okay. So engine is mounted on the chassis, and that power we need to provide to the wheels at the ground. So this one is the difference, and that to some angle we need to transmit the power. So for that, this propeller shaft and inversion joint along with slip joint is used. So this way you can consider this is a propeller shaft and this one is the inversal joint which is required to transmit the power at varied angle. Now you should see here this angle is about 30 degree. This is called as a drive angle. So for inversal joint, this angle is allowed up to 30 degree. More than that, if angle is going to be increased, in that case, constant velocity joints are used. So this is the schematic with respect to the front engine rear wheel drive. So for the front engine front wheel drive, constant velocity joints are used. So you know, whenever vehicle is moving on the road, this wheel has to confront, bounce and pit in the road. Accordingly, there will be suspension. This is the lift spring. It will move in upward direction, and this distance is going to be changed. So how to compensate that change in the distance? For that, slip joint is used. So slip joint is used to compensate increase and decrease in the distance. So this is the means of power transmission at varied angle and varied length. So how many elements are used? Inversal joint, propeller shaft and slip joint. Okay. Then next requirement which provides, next arrangement which provides means of power to front axle and rear axle in case of four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. So to get power at two front wheels and two rear wheels, a transfer case is used, and this heavy structure is used in case of four-wheel drive and the all-wheel drive. Okay. Then next requirement is to transmit power at 90 degree. So this one is the propeller shaft. This one is the pinion. This is crown wheel. So this pinion and the crown wheel, bevel pinion and the bevel crown wheel. So accordingly, we can get power transmission at the 90 degree. So this unit is called as a final drive. This one is the final drive. So it provides speed reduction between gearbox and the drive wheels, as well as we can get diversion of power flow at right angles. So this way power is flowing. So how to make diversion? By using the crown wheel and the bevel pinion arrangement. Okay, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So next requirement to have different speeds when required. So on the curvature or on the curved road, vehicle has to negotiate the turn. In that case, there should be one arrangement which will able to provide different speed for the rear wheels. So for that, differential is required. So this differential provides means to drive the driving wheel at different speed when required. So this is the schematic or simple differential or simplified diagram for the differential. So we are going to see in detail. This is only for your understanding. I have shown one figure. Okay. Once again, I will repeat. Okay. So the requirement of transmission. So first requirement, connection and disconnection of engine power with rest of power transmission. For that, clutch is required. Then for varied leverage between engine and drive, gearbox is required. So means to transfer power in opposite direction, gearbox as well as transfer case is required. Means of power transmission at varied angle and varied length, propeller shaft, universal joint and slip joint is required. Then means of speed reduction between engine and the drive. So final drive is required. Means of diversion of power flow at right angles, final drive is required. And finally, means to drive the driving wheels at different speed when required, differential is required. Differential is provided. Okay. Okay. So now let us see the first element of the transmission system. Okay, I request all the students to unmute. Sorry, to mute their mics. Okay. So, should I proceed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, first element of the transmission system. Now we are going to see in detail. Clutch. Okay. So this is simplest diagram shown. Screen is visible. Sachin, clutch position दिसतायत का?
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. Okay. So clutch. First of all, we are going to see what is clutch. So clutch is one type of mechanical coupling which connects and disconnects engine power to the rest of transmission system, or it is an assembly which consists of driving and the driven element. So what are the elements? First one is the flywheel, then clutch plate, that is friction plate, and finally the pressure plate. So three important elements are there in the clutch assembly. Now here you should see why clutch is required, and simultaneously we are going to see when disengagement is required. So this is the position wherein you can see disengaged. That indicates that this is the engine. Here, this is clutch pedal. So clutch pedal linking is given to this clutch assembly so that we need to have the disengagement. So here you can see engine is disconnected with the clutch and accordingly power is not transmitting to the gearbox. So when disengaged when starting the engine. आपण गाडी चालू करताना एकतर व्हेकल न्यूट्रल गिअर मध्ये जर असेल तर क्लच ऑपरेट करत नाही, and व्हेकल एखाद्या गिअर मध्ये असेल, in that case we are disengaging the clutch to start the engine. So disengaged when starting the engine. Now whenever we want to shift the gear or the driver want to shift the gear, at that time engine is rotating. So while engine is rotating, and if it is connected to the transmission system, which will not allow to shift the gear. So for that reason, we are going to disengage for shifting the gear. So engine is running and we are going to shift the gear. How it is possible? Whenever we are going to stop the power flow of engine to the transmission system. Again, clutch is disengaged when stopping the vehicle. So again, to provide the neutral and to stop the vehicle, we are cutting down power from the engine to the transmission system just by pressing the clutch. What it indicates, pressing the clutch means clutch disengaged. So stopping the vehicle, and again we are going to apply the brakes. And last, disengaged when idling the engine. So ट्रॅफिक मध्ये सर गाडी जर थांबलेली असेल किंवा व्हेकल थांबवले आपण, so we have stopped the vehicle at that, in that case to idle the engine. So transmission system आपल्याला डिस्कनेक्ट करायचे, फक्त इंजिनच रनिंग राहणार. In that case that is called as a disengaged when idling the engine. इंजिन वरचा लोड काढण्यासाठी किंवा एखाद्या उतारावरून गाडी अशी मूव्ह करते. In that case it is not necessary to have engagement between the engine power to the transmission system. So sometimes we are providing neutral, at that time there will not be any load on the engine, so idling the engine. Okay, now next, clutch position, that is engaged position. You can see here wait for 1 minute. Okay, so next position of the clutch, that is, you can clearly seen from the slide. So this one is the engine, this is the clutch, and this is gearbox. So this is engaged position. So what you are observing here, power flow from engine to the gearbox. So continuous arrow is shown, and this cable indicates clutch actuation mechanism. Now clutch pedal is free, so we are just releasing clutch pedal, that will provide engaged position, and accordingly power is transmitted from engine to the gearbox via clutch. So when clutch is engaged, or when engagement of the clutch is required, so to have vehicle to move, or we need to keep vehicle in moving condition, so for that clutch is engaged. So majority of the time clutch is in engaged position. So for that reason the clutch assembly itself is known as clutch, and clutch means to grab. क्लच हा एंगेज्ड पोझिशन मध्ये असतो, असा एखादा इंटरव्ह्यू मध्ये तुम्हाला क्वेश्चन विचारला जाऊ शकतो. सो मेजॉरिटी टाइम दॅट एंगेजमेंट इज रिक्वायर्ड, सो दॅट्स वाय इट इज इन एंगेज्ड पोझिशन. कधी कधी आपल्याला तो डिसएंगेज करावा लागतो, and certain occasionally we are going to disengage it, and so it is in engaged position all the times. Okay, so here now we are going to see the functions of a clutch. Here you can see clutch pedal down, see schematic diagram, it is self-explanatory. So disengage position. So what it indicates? First function is to disconnect power flow from engine to the transmission system. So already we have seen this figure on previous slide as well. So clutch pedal pressed, this will disengage the clutch. Okay. Then clutch pedal moving up. So this will indicate that this clutch driven plate is in contact with the flywheel, and now power is flowing to this gearbox. So clutch pedal free, that means it is free from the foot pressure, then clutch is engaged. Okay, समजलं का सचिन हे?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so engaged and disengaged असा प्रश्न इंटरव्ह्यूला विचारला जातो, कॅम्पस इंटरव्ह्यूला वगैरे. क्लच जनरली एंगेज असतो का डिसएंगेज असतो? सो क्लच इटसेल्फ मीन्स ग्रॅब ऑर होल्ड. त्याचा अर्थ काय होतो? फ्रिक्शन प्लेट किंवा क्लच प्लेट आहे ही कॉन्टॅक्ट मध्ये असते फ्लायव्हीलच्या. गरज लागल्यानंतरच आपण तो कॉन्टॅक्ट डिस्कनेक्ट करतो. Okay. Then we are going to see the requirements of clutch. So this is the clutch, and now we are going to see the requirements of the clutch. Functions बघितले आपण. Now we will see the requirement. So first requirement is to have torque transmission. So whatever torque available at the flywheel, and maximum part of that torque should be transmitted to the transmission system so that vehicle is able to move from its place. So torque transmission, that is the first requirement. Then second requirement, gradual engagement. Gradual engagement. So the whatever clutch which we are going to provide, or which has been provided on the vehicle, it should take the load gradually. Gradually. So best example, you can see the roller on the ground. So क्रिकेटचं पिच असतं आणि त्याच्यावर रोलर आपण एकदम फ्लॅट आणि एकदम कॉन्क्रीट सरफेस मिळावा खेळपट्टीचा म्हणून काय करतो, त्याच्यावरून आपण रोलर फिरवतो. त्या रोलरला जर एकदम जर्क देऊन जर आपण असं ढकलायचा प्रयत्न केला, what will happen? So it will provide injury to the shoulder. So it should take load gradually. So or here it is given in the next requirement, engage gradually to avoid the sudden jerk. एकदम आपण क्लच असा हळूहळू एंगेज करतो. क्लच प्रेस केला म्हणजे डिसएंगेज होतो, आणि सोडताना रिलीजिंग मीन्स इट इज एंगेजिंग. So just we are smoothly releasing, that will provide gradual engagement, and power transmission or torque transmission will be there without any additional jerk or sudden jerk. Now whatever clutch assembly which is provided, it should dissipate the heat. It should dissipate the heat. What it indicates? So flywheel is there. The friction plate, that is the clutch plate, is in contact with the flywheel. So with continuous power transmission, it will get heated. And how to dissipate that heat? So whatever assembly of the clutch, there should be facility to have dissipation of the heat to maintain the coefficient of friction constant. So when there will be heat, there will be decrease in the coefficient of friction. How to avoid that? There should be heat dissipation arrangement. Then it should have easily operated or ease of operation. So whatever force or the press required, it should be less. It should not provide any fatigue to the driver. So whatever that pressure required to maintain contact between the flywheel and the friction plate, it should be less, so that whenever disengagement is required, it will require less pressure or less press. Then it should be small in size. It should be small in size. Now, if clutch assembly is big, it will have more inertia. Even though power is disconnected, it will rotate for some time, and that will provide trouble while shifting the gears. Again, next requirement, inertia and mass or light in weight. It should have less inertia and mass. So in other words, light in weight. Then good wearing properties. So whatever friction material which is used, that for the frictional lining, that should have good wearing properties. Then there should be arrangement with respect to damp down the vibrations. So coil springs are used. Again, those coil springs are used to have dynamic balance. Then clutch should be easy for adjustment, and it should also have less play, or you can call it as a free pedal play. So there should be only small play, because a driver or the operator is having habit to keep foot on the clutch pedal, and if there will not be any play, then what will happen? There will be disengagement of the clutch, or sometimes there will be slight friction. So sliding is going to take place between the flywheel and the friction plate or the clutch plate, and that will wear the clutch plate. Okay. So these are the requirements that we have seen. So this one is the schematic. This may be asked for the MCQ. Now let us see how clutch is working and principle of operation of the clutch. So you can see this one is the shaft on which one disc is mounted. Let us say this is A, this one is B. A and this is B. Okay. So this A is rotating. A is rotating, and as gap is there, this B is not rotating. So even though A is rotating, you can consider A as a flywheel. and this B as a clutch plate or the friction plate. So this flywheel is component of the engine. This is first component of the transmission system. So how to continue this power from this flywheel to the transmission system? For that, we need to slide this clutch plate towards this flywheel, and that will make possible power flow from the engine to the transmission system via this first element. So when this A will rotate, and if this B is in contact with this A, then both will rotate in the same direction, and now power is transmitted from this side to this side. So this is the aspect or the principle of operation of the clutch. Very simple one. Now, based on the torque transmission requirement, so the size of the clutch plate will be decided. So basically, this is the flywheel and this one is the friction plate or the clutch plate. So as this friction plate is in contact with the flywheel, based on the area of the surface on which friction lining is provided, the torque transmission capacity is going to be decided, or how much pressure is applied on them. Based on that, torque transmission capacity is decided. So we need to provide a pressure via mechanism, some mechanical mechanism, and based on that, power is going to be transmitted from this engine to the from this flywheel to the transmission system. So whatever friction between two surfaces, so this is one surface, this one is the second surface, that depends upon area of the surface, how much surface is available to have the contact between the flywheel and the friction plate. Then pressure applied upon them. How much pressure via springs is applied on the friction plate or the clutch plate. And the third one, coefficient of friction of the surface material. So whatever lining which is provided, so that lining is not shown in this figure. So here some material is provided, and whatever coefficient of friction of the surface material. So this coefficient is going to play important role. So based on the value of coefficient of friction, different materials are used. Okay, so some of the friction materials and their coefficient of friction. So you can see leather is having coefficient of friction 0.27. Another material, that is cork, which is having friction coefficient of friction as 0.32. Then fabric coefficient of friction 0.40, and asbestos coefficient of friction 0.20. So this may be asked for the MCQ. Okay, now let us see the classification of the clutches. So this classification, this is again first one positive clutches, and second one the gradual engagement clutches. So based on how engagement is provided, there are two major types. What is first one? Positive clutch. And what is second one? Gradual engagement clutches. So positive clutches consist of dog clutch, spline clutch. We are going to see their images. Then gradual engagement clutches. Here frictional material is used. Here only mechanical elements are used. And in case of gradual engagement, there will be first type friction clutches, in that cone clutch, then single plate clutch, and the multi-plate clutch. And again, the second type for the gradual engagement, that is other forms of the clutches, wherein centrifugal clutch and electromagnetic clutch. So this centrifugal clutch works on principle of centrifugal force. This is on electromagnetic force. Then use of hydraulic power. So based on that, there is one more clutch, and which is called as a fluid flywheel, or simply fluid coupling. So here it is given fluid hydraulic coupling. And instead of gearbox, if fluids along with three elements, stator, rotor, and the casing, and that will be considered as, that is nothing but the hydraulic torque converter. So that is element which is used in case of automatic transmission. Okay. So you can see what is positive clutch or positive clutches. Okay. So this one is, I will call it as, or instead of input, this is 1 and this one is 2. Okay. Now, so it has to shift in this direction to get the engagement. So here you are not observing any frictional material. So directly this extrusion will be shifted in this cavity, and this will shifted in this cavity, and such type of clutching arrangement is called as a positive clutch. So there is no possibility of sliding between these two elements. It's a permanent engagement hote. So that's why it is called as a positive clutches. So whatever torque available at this disc, and the same will be transmitted to this disc and consequently to the shaft. But in case of the frictional clutches, so there is sliding, so there will be some transmission losses. So whatever torque available at the flywheel, that will not be transmitted 100% to the clutch gear. So that's why clutches are designed to transmit more 25% than the required. Okay, so this is positive clutch. Then another example of positive clutch, you can see parts. So number 1, this is Flywheel shaft. Number 2, sleeve. Number 3, Flywheel clutch. Number 4, driving shaft. And number 5, sleeve having internal teeth. So this sleeve, this 5 number sleeve, it can be slide on this Flywheel shaft, and if this is in mesh with this 3 Flywheel clutch, so we will have the positive transmission or positive clutch. इथे power loss किंवा torque loss होण्याचा संबंध येत नाही. So that's why we are going to call it as a positive clutches. Okay. समजलं का सचिन? Am I audible, Milind?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Positive clutch एक दुसरे example देतो तुम्हाला सगळ्यांना. Right. So whatever our submersible pumps किंवा विहिरीवरची मोटार वगैरे असते त्याला आणि पंप असतो, and that is coupled with the help of one coupling. So that is best example of the positive clutch. Okay. Now, second major type, that is gradual engagement clutches. In that, cone clutch. So here, what you are observing, you can see clutch shaft number 1, then number 2, this is male cone, number 3, female cone, and number 4, that is frictional surface. So this one is the clutch shaft, and whatever power we need to transmit to this third number element. How it is possible? Wait for 1 minute. Okay. So sorry for the break. Okay. So this is the cone clutch. Actually, it is not in our syllabus, but already you might have studied this during second year. Okay. So this is gradual engagement clutch. This one is the frictional material. So this frictional material helps to transmit torque from this shaft to this clutch shaft. Okay. So such arrangement is mounted on the flywheel, or you can just consider this number 3 as a flywheel and this as a clutch, and on which this frictional material is provided. So we can shift this way. So this shaft is having like this, right? So it can be moved in this direction or in this direction to get the power transmission from this flywheel to this clutch and ultimately to the transmission system. Okay. Then now this is the single plate automobile clutch. Now you are going to see in detail. First of all, this one is the engine shaft. This is engine shaft. First of all, we are going to see the construction. Engine shaft on which this is the flywheel. Then this is friction plate. This is the friction plate. This one is the friction lining. This is pressure plate. This is the springs, helical spring. This one is the helical spring. These are the plines provided on the driven shaft. That is the clutch shaft. Then this is release lever. This one is the release lever. This is thrust race or thrust bearing. This is cover or the housing. So before this, I will try to draw figure. Okay. So this is the crankshaft on which this is the flywheel, and this is the clutch plate. असा हा क्लच शाफ्ट आहे. सो हे क्लच प्लेट रोटेट झाल्यानंतरच हा क्लच शाफ्ट रोटेट होईल. तर ही क्लच प्लेट रोटेट होण्यासाठी ही क्लच प्लेट ह्या फ्लायव्हीलच्या कॉन्टॅक्ट मध्ये यावं लागेल. सो डायरेक्ट मेटल टू मेटल कॉन्टॅक्ट होऊ शकतो का? It is not practical. So instead of that, we are providing frictional material. So schematically it is shown like this, and this frictional material is in contact with this flywheel, then power is going to flow in this direction. So how to provide contact between this clutch plate and the flywheel? For that, we need to move this clutch plate on this shaft in this direction. So for that such lines are provided, and now clutch plate is able to move in this direction. So again, how to keep the pressure on the clutch plate? For that, there is pressure plate. How to maintain the pressure on the pressure plate? For that, springs are provided. So you can see. So once again, this one is the engine shaft. This is flywheel. This is friction plate. फ्रिक्शन प्लेट कशावर माउंट केलेले आहे? ह्या स्प्लाइनला शाफ्टवर. आणि हा कसला शाफ्ट आहे? ड्रिव्हन शाफ्ट. हा ड्रायव्हिंग आणि हा ड्रिव्हन. ज्यावेळेस क्लच प्लेट ह्या फ्लायव्हीलच्या कॉन्टॅक्ट मध्ये येईल, then the clutch plate is going to rotate. As clutch plate is mounted on this spline shaft, this shaft is also going to be rotated. Then to disconnect the power transmission from flywheel to the clutch shaft, what we need to have? Clutch plate आणि flywheel यांच्यामधला कॉन्टॅक्ट डिस्कनेक्ट करणे. How to disconnect that contact? Just by providing thrust on this bearing. So this is thrust bearing, which will operate this release lever. It is pivoted at this point. So this is the casing. This one is the casing. So such casing is provided. So once again, I will draw. This is the flywheel, and such casing is mounted on the flywheel. This one is the pressure. हे casing सुद्धा flywheel बरोबरच फिरत आहे. As it is mounted on the flywheel, casing is mounted on the flywheel, and inside that, this is the pressure plate. So you can see another view. Okay, some of the major components. This is the flywheel. This is friction plate or friction disc or driven plate. For this, we can also call it as a clutch plate. This clutch plate is having one hub at center. One hub at center, and this is the riveting which is used to provide the frictional lining. This one is the pressure plate, which is required to apply the pressure on the clutch plate. This one is the spring. This is the spring. So all these springs are used to apply the pressure on the pressure plate, which is being used to maintain contact between this clutch plate and the flywheel. So this is expanded condition. You can see the springs are expanded. Now to release the clutch, that will provide engagement between this flywheel and the clutch plate. आणि क्लच जर दाबल्यानंतर काय होईल? ह्या स्प्रिंग आपल्याला कॉम्प्रेस करावं लागते. त्याच्यामुळे काय होणार आहे? ही प्रेशर प्लेट इकडच्या बाजूस येईल. इथं नाही दाखवू शकत. These are the major components. So you can see this is the casing or cover, inside which there are different mountings on which we can fix the springs. We can attach this pressure plate, and for that, for this clutch plate, there will be spindle shaft, which is not shown in this. So, समजले काय एलिमेंट्स तर समजले काय ज्यामधले सचिन मिलिंद
Yes, sir.
now just wait for 1 minute. Now it is better. ते अंडरस्टँड करायला सोपं आहे. मिलिंद Sachin, are you there? मिलिंद समजलं का हे कंपोनेंट्स कसे रिलेट केलेत मी ते?
Yes, sir.
ओके. कन्स्ट्रक्शनच इम्पॉर्टंट आहे ह्याच्यामध्ये आणि हे स्प्रिंग्स. ओके. So this one is the flywheel and you can see this. This is the ring gear. Yesterday we have seen such ring gear is required to provide the cranking. And हे flywheel वर माउंट केलेले असते. Such ring gear or ring which is mounted on the flywheel. Okay. Now let us see how it works, right? So already we have seen the schematics of the clutch functions. Okay. So now this is disengaged position. You can see because clutch plate is not in contact with this flywheel. So a driver has to apply thrust, some force, so via that clutch pedal, and this one is the pivot point. त्याच्यामुळे काय होईल, हा thrust bearing वर जर फोर्स अप्लाय केला तर हा जो स्टड आहे it will provide compression to this helical spring. त्याच्यामुळे हे प्रेशर प्लेट इकडच्या बाजूला येईल and this clutch plate will be released from the external pressure. आणि engage कसं होणार? So once driver will release the clutch pedal, this thrust bearing will move in this direction. Ultimately, the helical springs will be expanded and the pressure will be applied on this clutch plate via this pressure plate. That will be the engaged position. Okay. You can see the major components already we have seen. Okay. So should I proceed for next bit? So single plate clutch we have seen. Next, we are going to study the multi-plate clutch. Before that, we need to see why multi-plate clutch is required or which is necessary. So here, once again, you can see the flywheel. This one is the friction plate. Now, The ability of clutch assembly to transmit the torque that depends upon number of elements. So three aspects are important. Area of surface, pressure किती applied करावं लागणार आहे, किती केलं जाणार आहे, and what is coefficient of friction of the material frictional lining or the material used for the frictional lining. So I will show first why multi-plate clutch is required. Now this is flywheel. Then this is friction plate and this is the frictional material or this is the frictional material lining, one band shown. Okay, so suppose this is having diameter d1, this is d2, okay. So d1 less than d2. In which case more torque will be transmitted? Milin. Sachin. So if, hello, somebody can tell. Okay, so area of surface, how much area of that frictional material that can be used to get the torque transmission, then how much pressure can be applied, and the coefficient of friction of that particular material. Area जास्त असेल तर torque transmission जास्त होईल. किंवा pressure applied केला आपण pressure plate वर, that will apply pressure on the clutch plate, or from that also we can have large torque transmission. And if material having large coefficient of friction, if it is used, in that case also we can have large power torque transmission. So now space is the constraint. Mute yourself. So all the students, I request they should check mic condition. Don't unmute. Okay. So nowadays, as our aim is to design a compact clutch, then the compact clutch or small clutch, it is not possible to have large torque transmission or more torque transmission. In that case, we need to use multiple plates that will make able to transmit more torque. So whatever friction between the two surfaces depends upon area of the friction surface, how much axial force applied upon them, two elements कॉन्टॅक्ट मध्ये ठेवण्यासाठी किती प्रेशर अप्लाय केलंय, किती ऍक्सियल फोर्स अप्लाय केलाय, त्याच्यावर त्या दोन्ही मधलं फ्रिक्शन डिपेंड्स आहे. अँड थर्ड वन, वॉट एव्हर फ्रिक्शनल लाइनिंग which is used, what is the coefficient of friction of that material. So that is again the friction between the two surfaces having three aspects. Then the torque transmission depends upon diameter of the flywheel, diameter of the pressure plate, and the applied pressure. So for the tractor, you can take example. For the tractor, a bigger engine is there, so we can have larger flywheel. Diameter flywheel चा जास्त असतो. Then we can use pressure plate of the same diameter, and we can have the clutch plate with somewhat reduced diameter. So large flywheel is available, we can have more torque transmission. But for in the small vehicles or the cars, that much space is now not available. So for that reason, we can use multiple plates which will increase the torque transmission. So एक तर diameter वाढवल्यानंतर तुम्हाला जास्त torque मिळू शकतंय. And if we can't increase the diameter, in that case we can use multi-plate clutches. Okay. So previously we have seen this is the single plate clutch. Now suppose this is designed to transmit 100 Newton meter torque. And now with the same size, we can have a multi-plate clutch which can transmit torque more than 100 Newton meter. So this will increase the contact between frictional surface. It will also increase the area of friction surface, and ultimately the coefficient of friction. So whatever coefficient of friction available, and suppose this is the frictional plate or clutch plate which can transmit 100 Newton meter. Again, if additional is used, then it will transmit another 100 Newton meter, and combinedly this multi-plate clutch is able to transmit twice the torque than the single plate clutch based on the number of plates. So such multi-plate clutch is used in the bikes. You might have seen while doing maintenance of your bike. So such multi-plate clutch is used to have maximum torque transmission. So more than one clutch plate, more than one pressure plate, so that assembly or such type of assembly is called as a multi-plate clutch. So in many racing cars, such multi-plate clutch is used as more torque transmission requirements are there. You can see another figure with respect to the multi-plate clutch. This is engine shaft. So this is simplest one. Now here springs along the circumference Here one central springs is provided. Another construction is same. You can see engine shaft. This one is the flywheel, friction rings or the friction plates, then disc or the plates. So these are required to apply the pressure. These are required to apply the pressure. So ultimately, it will boost the torque transmission as number of plates are going to be increased. So such multi-plate clutches are used in vehicles having compact layout. So small in size, with available space, we can increase the torque transmission capacity of the clutch assembly. So you can see the various elements. This one is frictional lining. So just I'm stopping. So tomorrow we will take this centrifugal clutch, another type of gradual engagement. So wait for a minute. Wait, I am taking attendance. Please wait. Shashi Thorat, what is your roll number? So name without roll number. I am not going to consider his or her attendance. So please note that. In addition to roll number, you can write the name, or in addition to your name, you should type your roll number. And some students, they are just mentioning TYA. So you should note that you are in final year of your BTech. So accordingly, I request you to Type current roll number.